Hello, friends. Welcome aboard the Round Trip Stories podcast, where we share stories of moving around the world and back again, reflecting on the lessons we've learned along the way. My name is Melissa.
And my name is Tracy, and we're so glad you're joining us for today's episode. Welcome back to part 2 of our interview with Christen Morrow Ara, a U.S. advocate for youth with disabilities and their families, and mother of 4. During 5 years in Peru, Christen found life-giving work in helping to establish and train others to care for the intellectually disabled. Shortly after she married her Peruvian husband, a frightening accident gave her time to think of the next steps in her life, family, and work, which eventually meant moving back to California. This would be her return, but her husband's first move to the U.S. So, buckle your seatbelts and make sure your tray tables and seats are in their upright positions as part 2 of Christen's round trip story gets ready for takeoff.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Round Trip Stories podcast. We are excited to conclude our interview with Christen Morrow Ara. If you missed part 1 of our interview with her, please go back and listen to it. But today we're going to be listening to her talk about moving from Peru back to California, and we're looking forward to getting to hear the rest of the story.
Yeah, so just to start us off, can you do a quick recap of how long you were in Peru and then when and why you left to come back to California, and what you did at that point, because it's been a while, and then what you do now?
Sure. So in 2008, I moved to Lima, Peru to serve with Young Life as the divisional coordinator to develop Capernaum across Latin America. So Capernaum is our outreach to students with developmental and intellectual disabilities. Often there's people with multiple disabilities. And so I got to run around Latin America walking alongside of nationals and giving them vision and teaching and coaching them in how they would do what they already do in Young Life, which is through friendship, share the gospel, and invite kids into a relationship with their creator with a lot of fun and a lot of silly and camping. And so that was my role. I lived in Lima. Most of my work was in Lima, but I did that across Latin America. And I moved back in 2013. And I moved back. I as I shared last time, I don't know if I really talked about it. I got married while I lived in Peru.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, I talked a lot about Christian, but
yeah, not the whole story.
So 6 months into living in Peru, Christian and I started dating. We dated for 3 years. And then we were married in 2011, and it wasn't easy to get a visa for him to come and meet my family. He was turned down twice, third time's a charm. And he came and kind of met my whole world. He says I took him on a tour like he was a monkey in the zoo, because everywhere we went, people were like, "Who are you? And what is your," So we did a tour all over California, my community there. We went to Arizona, and then we went to visit family in New Jersey. So
Wow.
Because he had a visitor visa, we had a religious wedding in the United States, but did our civil wedding in Peru, which is in many Latin countries is typical. There's a religious and a civil wedding. So we were married in October of 2011, and in January of 2012, I was driving our ministry van home from a meeting, getting ready to pick kids up to go to camp that evening at the beach in southern Lima. Christian was already at the beach preparing, and a bus that was racing another bus to get ahead ran a red light and hit me. And really, and most people didn't think I was alive. I was knocked unconscious. I remember waking up and hearing people say, "Está muerta, está muerta." Is she dead? So that started a process. I considering the impact of the car accident, I came out really great. But I'm doing great, but I spent some time in the hospital and had a pretty significant concussion and have dealt with some kind of shoulder and neck stuff since then. But it started a process for us of evaluating where we were living. Not at first. At first, I thought, okay, we'll just heal and keep going. But I wasn't quite right in the head for a little while. We laughed because now I remember when I realized what I was doing, I kept saying, "Christian, the phone's not working." And he looks at me and he's like, "That's the remote. You're dialing on the remote." "Oh, that's not the phone." So,
Oh,
Wow.
instead of putting the milk in the refrigerator, I put it in the oven. And it was a process, but
so, and how long had you guys been married at that point?
not even 3 months. Not even 3 months.
Oh my goodness. For you to
Wow.
be
Poor
have
guy,
to go
right?
through all that. Well,
Yeah.
poor
Yeah, and for
you.
him to
Poor you too.
Or both of you.
Yeah, it was a wild experience. So,
Hmm.
um So we ultimately made the decision to move back to the United States, which was a big deal because it would include immigration for Christian, and was pretty
Yeah.
unsure what that process would look like.
Yeah.
We were unsure what my role would be with Young Life, if I would continue, if there was a job for me. My dear friend and mentor at the time was the vice president of Capernaum and said, "Let's figure this out. We need and want you on the team." But it was a big deal. And so we started
Yeah.
the process for Christian to immigrate. And it was smoother and quicker than I would have imagined. The paperwork went through in 2 or 3 months. It was surprising. And so we boarded a plane on April 14th. I remember because April 15th is tax day and my grandfather's birthday. So we arrived in the wee hours of the morning in Los Angeles on April 15th, 2013.
So tell us a little bit about, I mean, it's reentry for you and it's immigration for him. Tell us a story about that process.
Yeah, I think as I reflect back, I look at the dynamics of our relationship really shifted because in Peru, he was the expert. I leaned heavily on him and his insight and his connections and his, knowledge. So moving to the States, I think probably more than I need to, I took on the like, oh, I have to tell him how to do it. I have to tell him you can't drive that way here. That's probably where it showed up the most is driving the car.
Traffic in Lima is not the same. You don't drive the same here.
And he knew that. He'd been to the United States 2 or 3 times to visit at that point. Spoke great English, so that wasn't a hard thing. But I would say even similar, our transition back was probably smoother than most people I know.
Hmm.
Community and relationships being probably the main thing. Being able to step back onto a team. At least the team was familiar to me that I was serving with. A lot of people were like, "Oh, we're so excited you're back." So that was really helpful. And at the same time that we moved back to Fresno, my parents had decided to move to Fresno to be closer to grandkids, and then my younger brother decided to move to Fresno. So within that first couple of months of us coming back, the whole Morrow family landed here, which was really sweet. So for the first 9 months we were back, we lived with my parents and my younger brother in that home while everyone figured out what they wanted to do. So my parents ended up buying a home on a different side of town, and later on, Christian and I ended up buying this house. But it was interesting to go from our own little apartment in Peru to sharing that with my parents and my brother and our dog. But also, again, very grounding to do life together.
Mhm.
The loneliness of missing people, there wasn't a lot of space for it because we were deeply connected. And so we started to build, I think, really my community became Christian's community, just like his had become mine. And he was able to get a job working for the school district with kids, and then eventually went back to school to become an LVN.
LVN is licensed vocational nurse. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he works in the emergency room at our local hospital. But yeah, he started over going back to school, and holidays and traditions and what was normal was really gone. But he's also an adventurer, and he loves to learn, and he's ambitious, and he just decides he can do just about anything if YouTube tells him how, and he just does it.
Yay.
So I think it's pretty incredible to look back and see how quickly and how well he adapted.
It sounds like you did a lot of ministry together in Peru. What was he doing in Peru?
Yeah, so Christian's a jack of all trades. He'd done he'd gone to a technology institute to do computer programming. He'd learned how to make laminate wood, and then he had studied English, and he was an interpreter for missions teams, that short-term missions teams that came from the United States. So he was running all over Peru with teams, and we did get to do so much. It's funny that you bring that up. So much ministry together. And I think that was that probably is the biggest change. And the thing we miss the most is our lives now are really separate. A lot of the ministry that I do now is more administrative, meeting, coaching, and creating trainings. And so, and then he's at the hospital for 12-hour shifts. And so we live in really different worlds from each other now. And every time we have the opportunity to do any kind of ministry together, we've learned it's just so good for our relationship. It's so good for our hearts because that's where we started.
It brings you back together in that aspect.
That's good.
Well, and then you have your ministry of your family, right?
Yes.
That's very unifying.
And when we first came back, we didn't have children yet. And so we stepped back on as volunteers to the team that I had started. And so we did get to serve together there, and that was really fun. And in fact, while we were involved there was a young man who came to Young Life Club who had Down syndrome and right away just stood out as kind of one in a million. His heart and his respect and his emotional intelligence and his desire to serve. And so as we got to know Zachary, he shared that his parents were preparing to move overseas as missionaries to go teach at a college in Lithuania. And we had agreed, our hearts were on the mission field. God's brought us back to California. Let's see any way we can leverage what we have or who we are to serve people who are going. I didn't think that we were going to get a son out of that. So Zachary's parents moved to Lithuania, and Zach moved in with us 8 years ago. And his parents have since returned, but Zach is thriving, and they live in a different part of the state where there's not as much access or services for people with disabilities. So Zach, we thought he was going to move in for a year or two. When I brought up the idea, I thought Christian would tell me I was crazy. And he said, yeah, let's do it. So Zach moved in with us when I was pregnant. No, I had just had our second child. And he is deeply a part of our family. We call him our bonus son because he really is. And the kids call him Uncle Zach. So Zach came out of our ministry together as well and joined our family. So he's a big part of it.
So tell us about something or anything that was hard about moving back.
I remember for the first couple of years after I was back, anytime I'd introduce myself or someone would ask what I did, I had to say something. I look back now and I think it's kind of funny. I would say, and we were in Peru for 5 years, or I lived in Peru. And it had become so much a part of my identity that to say, my name's Christen, and I live in Clovis, and this is my husband, and I'm doing this thing with Young Life, that it felt like it wasn't true to who I was. And so probably people were like, why is she telling me she used to live in Peru? But that was a big piece of my identity that I think it had to kind of settle to the bottom of the glass, because any time that I spoke about who I was or what I did, I think I was grieving. I think it was such a loss that it was part of every conversation.
It is. It is part of our identities. And just like, where we're from originally is part of our identities. And we wouldn't not share that if people asked.
Yeah, I think that took some time for me to settle of who were we as a couple and as a family in the United States, because we had established our whole relationship in Peru. And it was important to us to kind of spend some time doing that before we had kids, because I thought we've got to figure out what this looks like. And I think probably, people would often ask about cross-cultural marriage for us. And I think most of the time, the challenge hasn't been the culture from Peruvian culture to North American culture as much as the culture of his family and, broken marriage and just some really hard things versus my parents' culture. And so there was a lot of figuring out how do we, who are we and how do we do this? And so those are probably our bigger barriers, but we wanted some time to figure that out and figure out how do we live in this country and provide for our family. And so our first child was born in 2014. So about 3 years after we got married.
I like that we're talking about marriages that are from two different countries, because that does obviously have a big influence on the marriage and like which country you choose to live in.
Sure.
I feel like how good that you were able to start in his country first.
Hmm.
To like root your marriage there, and then before you came
Absolutely.
back to the U.S. When Manuel and I got married, we were met and married here in the U.S., and he's from El Salvador, but he had already established himself here. But it was nice when we moved to China because neither of us were the expert there,
Yeah.
and we were
Neutral
experiencing that.
ground.
We were neutral ground, but he was actually more skilled because there was more chaos there.
Mm.
And he knew how to deal with water that goes out. He knew how to just melt the
Mm.
wax on a candle if the electricity is going to go out. The chaotic traffic didn't bother him. It was more of an adventure. So,
Yeah.
so I was just going to mention about the who are we part. Um, I love my husband's family.
Hmm.
And when we moved to China, we had been married maybe 5 years. No, 6 years. 6 years. And so over in China, I feel like we really had to depend on each other,
Hmm.
and we really
Hmm.
had to establish ourselves as our little family. But I guess when you talked about solidifying who you were, I feel like
Hmm.
for us, being overseas really helped that.
Yeah. And I think I don't know that many marriages have the opportunity to do that in the same way. I think
Sure.
when my car accident happened and we were in Peru, his family didn't live close by. They live about an hour away across town. That was really a solidifying time because I'm so strong and so independent and so capable, and I was not, and I needed him. And so I think
Mhm.
a lot of marriages probably don't have the same opportunity to be like just us, kind of pulling away from the world around us and figuring out our roles, and how we operate and communicate and argue and work through things. But that was, yeah, that makes sense to me that was like that for you in China. Um,
Mhm.
and it was interesting to do that living in a home with my parents for 9 months.
Right.
My
Like,
parents, who are wonderful. And at the end of the 9 months, it was time for all of us.
so is there anything else you want to add about what has been helpful for you in these years, or either during your transition when you first moved back, maybe, or since then?
And now it's been 11 years since you've been back?
12.
No, 12
Well,
years.
yeah.
Okay.
I think when we moved to California, we didn't know how long we'd be here, but we knew we would have the opportunity to return to visit, which is such a privilege. And we have been able, except for COVID, and then last year, because it just was a year, but we have returned at least once a year, every year. And so we just made our 10th trip
Yeah.
back home. And I think that is so significant. I know people who immigrate and don't have the possibility of a return. And even just knowing I could, same thing when I lived in Peru, knowing I could hop on a plane and come home to
Mhm.
California. And us living here and knowing we could hop on a plane and be in
Mhm.
Peru, whether Christian needs to go take care of something with his family or we all go. I think that was so grounding, and also, finding, especially in the early days, community with anyone who spoke Spanish was so important to me, especially. I think maybe more than Christian. I think Spanish really, probably became my heart language somewhere along the way, and,
Mhm.
I love Latinos, and so, connecting, with people who'd lived in other countries. When Lowell and Melissa moved back, it was so special to have somebody who knew our life there and who knows our life here. That's a unique thing.
Mhm.
That is a
Um,
Mhm.
treasure, treasure, treasure.
Yeah.
and just last year, my husband had a friend that he'd known in his early 20s. They had interpreted with missions teams together. That friend ended up moving to the United States, and he's a doctor, and he was going to be placed for residency, and he was placed in Fresno. And so Christian said, "Oh, do you remember Manuel? Do you remember?" And I was like, "No." And he's like, "Well, you've met him." He said, "So he's coming to Fresno." And so he said, "So he's going to stay with us for a month while he gets his family set up.
Of
So
course.
I was like, of course he is. So he moved in with us for a month. Somewhere along the way, I got to meet his wife. I laughed because as soon as I met him, I thought, I think I just met my brother-in-law because you have all the same mannerisms. So I met his wife. They were getting ready to move to Fresno with their children. And so when our kids met, we just introduced our kids to him and said, these are now your cousins, and this is now your aunt and uncle, which is just the beauty of Latino culture. And for Christian to have someone who knew his world and life
Yeah.
in Peru, but also knows his life, not just in the United States, but in the hospital, because they work for the same hospital system, and the
Yeah.
medical world has been so significant.
Okay, so this is the choose your own adventure question. So you get to pick one of these questions to answer. So, A, what rhythms do you have in place which allow you to remember your time abroad? B, what do you do with all the feels, the memories, relationships, and love for the place and people? Or C, do you have a favorite funny story about your time abroad or your transition back that you want to share? So, which of those questions do you want to answer?
We'll go with the rhythms.
Okay.
Or traditions. One of the things that we said as we were preparing to move back to the United States, we were reflecting on what do we want to take home with us from Peru? I say home, what are we going to take with us from Peru to California? And something I love about Peruvian culture on a Sunday, if people go to church, everybody just goes to be with their family. And things are pretty calm and quiet. And when I was single, that was really hard because everyone went to be with their family. When I lived with a family, that worked. When I was single and didn't live with a family, most people weren't available because they were going to their mom and dad's house or their tia's house or their abuela's house. And so Sundays we would go to church. We're the only ones in the family that go to church. And then most people would end up at grandma's house, which was down a story from us. And so we would head home from church and go hang out at grandma's and just sit around the table and visit. And, there'd be food and there'd be conversation. And the great part was it was just upstairs to go home. So if I was tired and done with conversation, I could just go to bed and he could keep visiting. So we said, we want to hold on to that. How do we really guard Sundays as time to be with family? And in different seasons, we've done better with that than others. Right now, he works 2 weekends a month. So 2 weekends a month, that's not possible. But just kind of capturing some of the things that are precious to us and saying, how do we hold on to that for our family here? I think also we've had many opportunities to host friends who've visited from Peru for varying lengths of time. And that's been really precious. And then the fact that we've gotten to go back so many times. Our daughter, if you talk to Abigail, she'll say that she used to live in Peru because we've gone so much. I think she literally thinks she lived there because we go back to the same house and, there's the toy box and there's all the things. And that's been really precious to us to not just remember our time abroad, but really continue. And I would say most of our friendships and relationships, every time we see them, they just pick right back up. And we've been in communication in between.
Mm-hmm.
And we also enjoy Peruvian food. So each of us have a couple of dishes that are kind of our thing that we'll make. And so having Peruvian food, speaking Spanish at home. At Christmas, I did not grow up doing anything on the 24th, but we now have panettone and stay up late and do some of those things.
All right, Christen, tell us a final story about how your time abroad continues to add value to your life now.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and my role with Young Life officially is that I serve as the Capernaum coordinator. I also serve as our Next Gen Leader regional trainer, and so we have a program called Next Gen Leader where we are intentionally choosing, usually college-age young people of color, to be part of a leadership development program where we work on spiritual formation, professional development, skills, how you do Young Life, and then ethnic identity development. And when my supervisor first suggested that I ask if I could be part of this team, it was in the middle of COVID, and I called the guy in charge and I said, "Hey, we really have a a gap in reaching people of color with disabilities in our Capernaum ministry. Most of our outreach has not been to kids of color. And if there's any way that I could serve or speak vision into these young people in this program you're going to do to give them a vision for people of color, I'd love to. And I said, I also really care about the Latino community and living here in the Central Valley. I know that's a big piece of it. And so he said, well, tell me a little bit more. I said, well, we just moved back from Peru a few years ago. At that point, it was more than a few years, but still, it's such a deep part of us. And, our children are bilingual and biracial. And I care a lot about their own ethnic identity development. And I didn't know how much I care or knew or understood about culture or ethnicity as I started that journey with the Next Gen Leader program. So I said, I'll just kind of be here and see how I can serve. And I think I have realized in the last few years that my journey from the elementary school I went to, from Latif, who sat next to me, to loving Spanish in high school and having teachers send all the students who were recently arriving into the country to hang out with us, to Peru, was like a high-level training for understanding culture and identity. And so I became part of this training team slowly and have become really an integral part of it. And I think what I've realized as I walk alongside of mostly Latino young staff here in the Valley, I think they've pointed this out, and I've realized you really understand and know Latino culture. And because I'm an outsider who's become an insider, I'm often able to see a situation from a different angle and say, I think what's happening here is this is what your supervisor's saying. And I'm thinking that this is clashing with your values and how I always say, as Latinos, and then people will laugh, and I forget that we as Latinos see it this way, but your supervisor might be looking at it this way. So I wonder if we were to have this conversation. So I've realized that my time, not just living overseas, but being deeply immersed and rooted in Latino culture has really become a powerful tool to understand and be a bridge between people. There was one situation early on in this that a supervisor and a staff person were just missing each other. He was a young guy. And I called the staff person who's very experienced in ministry and in life, and I said, I want to offer you something, and this might sound strange. I want to offer you something. This might sound strange or arrogant, but could I be a cultural broker for you? Because I think there might be some pieces that you just don't see. So I think really I've learned to be a cultural broker, and the richness of understanding and then getting to walk alongside of students and then getting to be a learner. My children go to a school where there's a large Punjabi population. And so and then we've gotten to read all these books on ethnic identity development. So I have become a student of culture and ethnicity, and I didn't know I needed that, wanted that, or had any experience in it until I came back and could look kind of down the road.
Yeah, and it's like all of these pieces are now these tools and learnings that you can use now. I love that. And I also think that the stage of life that we're in, kind of before middle age, it's like there's a lot of experiences that we've had, and also that we've built wisdom too, to be able to share. But I love how you said that you're a bridge builder. And I think that, I think we've talked about this in other episodes, how people who have this extended experience overseas can be great bridge builders back in their home countries.
Yeah.
And those are the people that we want as leaders. Those are the people that we want making big decisions when it involves different communities. If there are any employers listening to this, find your people who have lived overseas, and they will be your bridge builders, right?
Yeah. So I also get to walk with people as they look at not just their own culture and ethnicity, but how they interact with the world around them, and then how do we grow that? And not everyone can hop on a plane and move to China or Peru or some other place, but how do we grow that with respect and honor for cultures. So that's been fun.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And here in the United States and a lot of countries nowadays, we have a lot of opportunity to come into contact with different cultures. And it's so important, right, to be
And
able
that's the
to,
future of the world. We look
yeah.
at the majority population is now a mixed race population, or will be in the next, I forget what year that they expect that's going to happen. So the future is multicultural, multi-ethnic.
Okay, give us one last word of encouragement for our listeners.
I just spoke with a friend yesterday who had gone home to visit Egypt for the first time in 18 years. And
Wow.
she texted me later in the day and said, "I've been thinking about our conversation, and I don't know what to do with this. I feel like I left a piece of me there, and I'm having a hard time being present." And she shared this with somebody in her world who said, "But your identity is in Christ, and you're a mother, and this is your world, this is your family here." And she said, "I don't know what to do with that." And I just said, I think so often, especially as the American church, we've separated ethnicity and culture from somebody's identity in Christ. And I would say,
Mm.
deeply rooted in who we are is our cultural identity. And so, of course, you miss being there. Of course, what you're experiencing is grief, and it's normal. And it's going to be okay if it takes a while to settle back into life here. And they were there for 2 weeks, but it was the first time in 18 years. So of course,
Yeah.
you're not just grieving that you were there last week and you're not now. You're grieving the 18 years you lost,
Mhm.
and gained, because it's both. So
Sure,
I think
sure.
my encouragement is that, especially for someone who's lived overseas, it just takes some time, and it's okay to grieve even when you're really happy to be moving back to a place, because we hold that. My daughter, every time we are leaving the country, my oldest, she feels things deeply, and she loves Peru, loves her culture, loves her family. But she told me a few years ago on the ride to the airport, she said, "Mom, I don't know if I'll ever be able to be happy again, because when I'm here, I miss the United States. And when I'm in the United States, I miss here. And I just don't know what to do with that." And I said, that's it right there. That's the beauty and richness and gift and burden of having made a home in two places, is that you'll always miss one. But how beautiful that you have two homes and two communities and two countries
Mhm.
that you deeply love. So I think that's the
Mhm.
reality that those of us who've lived overseas experience.
Mhm. I really appreciate I just wanna comment on what you said about the cultural identity versus our identity as Christians and in Christ, and, like, I don't think any of us really, until we're in another place, realize how much our sense of who we are is related to our culture and how we function and how we know who we are in our home culture, societal structure, and things, and so, yeah, there are these other layers, and it doesn't
Mhm.
diminish who we are as Christians or whatever, but we're human.
Yeah.
There's always gonna be that other component.
One of my favorite books to walk young people through is called Being Latino in Christ. And
Mm.
it is so powerful for them to realize there's pieces of their culture that are redemptive and beautiful and rich. And there's pieces of their culture that need repentance and turning from, just like mine, just like all.
Mhm.
But I think especially in leadership development in the church and in parachurch ministries, we have not held space for the uniqueness and beauty and richness and brokenness that comes with our ethnic identity. And so the
Yeah.
NGL program, the Next Gen Leader program, has been such a powerful place for me to learn. First with me,
Yeah.
like, oh my goodness, I've got work to do. And then to help people see, and it's so powerful to see people integrate their faith and their ethnic identity and their leadership, and their professional development together. I think we have much
Yeah.
healthier leaders. But
That's
there's a book
awesome.
I love called Beyond Colorblind by Rachel
Oh,
Shin. And I wish that every leader or every Christian leader would read it, because I would say that I grew up saying that I didn't see color, that I saw people. And I've learned over the years that to not see someone's ethnic identity, to not see their color and what makes them unique, is to not truly see them, and to miss something
Mhm.
that was created in God's image that's beautiful and that adds flavor and richness to who they are. So I love Beyond Colorblind by Rachel Shin.
and we are beyond blessed to have had you on. Kristen, thank you so much for your encouragement and your stories. And we know that they just are continuing to develop, right? As we're back in our home countries, God uses us and our stories. And we hope that this podcast can help us to a state of thriving again and knowing that you're not alone.
Absolutely.
As we land this interview, we hope that you have been inspired by Kristen's stories. She and her husband, Christian, had to establish who they were as a couple now living in a different country, her home country. Although Christen continued to work for Young Life Capernaum, now in the U.S., Christian went back to school to work in the medical field. With time and support from family, new community, and yearly return trips to Peru, Christen is using all her experiences to be a cultural broker with her work in the United States. No matter what leg of the journey you're on, friends, we are so grateful you have brought us along with you. If you're enjoying our podcast, we'd love it if you would leave us a review in your podcast app. And don't forget, you can visit our website at roundtripstories.com to see photos of our guests and to join our email list. And of course, tell your friends to travel the world with us. No passport, no packing, and no goodbyes required. Thanks so much for listening, friends. We'll see you next time.